gentlemen, on Friday, President Trump tweeted this: "If Chairman Kim of North Korea sees this, I would meet him at the border DMZ just to shake his hand and say hello," followed by a question mark and an exclamation point. Kim Jong-un apparently saw the tweet yesterday, leading President Trump over the border at the heavily fortified demilitarized zone. Together, they walked several steps and held a brief photo op for North Korean photographers. After about a minute, President Trump led Kim into South Korea, where they addressed reporters before entering the Freedom House for about an hour-long private conversation with South Korean President Moon Jae-in.
I would invite him right now to the White House. I just want to say that this is my honor. I didn't really expect it. We were in Japan for the G20. We came over and I said, "Hey, I'm over here. I want to call Chairman Kim." And we got to meet, and stepping across that line was a great honor. A lot of progress has been made. A lot of friendships have been made, and this has been in particular a great friendship. Tremendous positivity. Really great things are happening, and in a lot of places. But we met and we liked each other from day one, and that was very important. It's my honor, and it's the chairman's honor. I would say we work well together. I want to thank Chairman Kim for something else. When I put out the social media notification, if he didn't show up, the press was going to make me look very bad. So you made us both look good, and I appreciate it. And it's just an honor to be with you, and it was an honor that you asked me to step over that line, and I was proud to step over the line. I want to thank you. It's been great. It's been great. Very historic.
As I said, Jonathan Lemire was there. I want to get the full backstory from John in just a second, but I want to go around the table just quickly. Richard, your trained mind as a foreign policy analyst, you watched that handshake at the DMZ first and then listened to those comments afterward. What are your thoughts?
It's still a total emphasis on personal diplomacy. Meetings are meant to be a means to an end, not an end to themselves. The most interesting thing against that backdrop is the New York Times story that the administration is reportedly considering something less than demanding denuclearization, what you might call something for something. North Koreans would accept certain constraints. We, in turn, would give them a degree of sanctions relief. That, to me, would be the possibility of real diplomacy. It wouldn't solve the problem. I might cap it or manage it. That would be meaningful. But what we saw the other day, no, that in and of itself isn't anything. And quite honestly, Willie, it's not just the personalization of foreign policy, but to keep calling him a friend and to be so flattering. This is a guy who is a dictator. The word dictator is overused. He really deserves the description. He is a tyrant, and what's happened inside that country has been a slow-motion genocide.
Elise, what do you think?
It makes me want to puke. Just my visceral reaction as an American who cares about democracy and human rights, the fact that Donald Trump is going out of his way to kiss up just to this monster instead of actually projecting strength. What have we gotten from the North Koreans for all of this pomp and circumstance and the propaganda coup of having the President of the United States crossing into North Korea? I don't understand what we've gotten except diminished our own standing in the world.
Remember, after the first meeting in Singapore, Jeremy, the president came out immediately and declared that North Korea had agreed to denuclearize. That hasn't happened, obviously, in the year or so since then. So I guess the question is, what comes from that handshake? Is it a means to an end, or is it just a photo op?
Well, it's symbolism over substance right now. I think the question is it harmless or is it harmful? And I would argue that in the year since the Singapore summit, the North Korean regime has advanced its nuclear missile capability. They've test-fired ballistic missiles, short-range missiles. They've probably continued a lot of work on their nuclear program. They haven't disclosed and provided an accounting for all of the undisclosed sites. So for Kim, he's playing the long game. He's biding time and increasing his capabilities, all the while we're taking a victory lap saying, wow, we got to step over the line and have a photo op.
So David Ignatius, that New York Times piece out this morning that Richard references suggests that the Trump administration is considering accepting not full denuclearization, but a freeze at this moment of where North Korea is, which would mean it would have some capability in return for sanctions relief. What's your reaction to that idea?
As I understand the Times story, the U.S. is coming back, in effect, to where North Korea was at the time of the Hanoi summit in February, where the North Koreans offered a limited closure of their nuclear facility at Yongbyon. President Trump, I think, wisely rejected that. the summit broke up. It was a humiliation for both, but especially for the North Koreans. Kim Jong-un has been thinking and worrying about that, and there's a sense that both sides have been exploring what's sometimes called Yongbyon Plus. In other words, some additional facilities outside the fence line in the Yongbyon area that are crucial to North Korean nuclear development. If that's now the realm of discussion, exploration, that's good. That's an appropriate step. The other thing I take as positive in this, and I have a slightly different view, I think, than Elise and Richard and Jeremy. This is, photo op diplomacy, but it seems to be the opening of the kind of working level discussions that will be part of a real denuclearization process. To me, the most important thing that Trump said, with all that kind of, blandishment of Kim Jong-un, my dear friend, et cetera, was speed is not an object in these talks. In other words, he's finally recognizing that denuclearization is a long, complicated process that is step by step. If this next idea, Yongbyon Plus, I want to call it again, is one of the things that they're talking about, that sounds appropriate. That sounds in the area of where we should be now. So I don't think we can assess that this is in any sense an achievement of something concrete. It hasn't made the world safer, but it is a rehabilitation of a process of talks that are good for U.S. security, good for Northwest Asia.
Jonathan Lemire, I woke up yesterday morning early getting ready for my Sunday Today show and saw right away your tweets, your reporting, your video that you'd sent out, photographs. You were right there when all that history was being made yesterday. Was it actually, though, as impromptu as the president has led on, as it appeared to be? Was it really just a tweet that Kim Jong-un and his people saw or heard about and agreed to step into the DMZ with him?
Well, first off, to Richard, the Red Sox were disappointing on multiple continents this weekend. No question about that. The backstory here, let's actually flash back to November 2017, when the president tried to make his first visit to the DMZ. And mind you, this was the height of the tensions with North Korea and the rhetoric like fire and fury when the two nations seemed to be on a collision course, perhaps even for conflict. At that time, the president, I was on that trip as well, and we were 5 minutes away from the border when they had to turn the helicopters around because the fog was too dense to land. But that trip was shrouded in such secrecy that when White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders told reporters about it, she wouldn't even say the words or the letters DMZ out loud. She wrote it on a piece of paper and held it up to us when we went to the motorcade to head out. This time, it was all about publicity and stoked by the president himself. Now, there is the trip to the DMZ itself had been the work for weeks. The White House would not officially confirm it, but we, in our reporting, knew that part of it was coming. The Kim invitation, though, does appear to be relatively spontaneous, taking both governments, U.S. and South Korea, by surprise when the president offered it over Twitter while we were still in Japan on Saturday. But by the end of that day, there was a sense that Chairman Kim would show up. The White House, of course, did not confirm that until just a few hours before we went to the DMZ. And it was an extraordinary scene. Questions, of course, need to be raised about what this really means. As we, time and time again, this is a president whose foreign policy seems to be about personal rapport with foreign leaders. And we saw it in other examples during this week-long summit as well, with Chairman Xi of China and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, and, of course, Vladimir Putin of Russia, where the president seemed more interested in sort of touting their cozy relationship than actually extracting any sort of policy success. But it certainly was. It was a moment for history. That images, resonated around the globe, at least for a time being, what we saw yesterday when, the media had a bit of a scuffle with North Korea security in order to watch it. But the president, went up the line, he shook Kim's hand, and upon Kim's invitation, stepped over into North Korea and then came back. That presented certainly a tremendous photo op, but it's going to take time to see what really comes of that day.
Let's look at the other side of this, Richard, what it must be like in North Korea this morning. We've seen some of the propaganda already in their media. This is splashed, of course, all over the front page of their media and on their television programs. What did Kim Jong-un get out of this moment right here?
Well, he gets this degree of international recognition, and he gets the promise of sanctions relief, which is what he wants. This is a country that's hurting economically. They've paid an enormous price for their closeness, for their resistance to market control and innovations, though they have introduced a degree of them. So that's the real thing that he can now hold out as internationally accepted We are a permanent reality as a government, as a country, which is a big deal. We're no longer facing the prospect of war, what it looked like a couple of years ago. Not because they've changed, by the way, but because we've pulled back. And that's where we are. The one thing I disagree, I think, with the president is this whole patience. The idea that time, we're not in any rush. Well, as Jeremy and others have pointed out, we ought to be in a little bit of a rush. Time is not neutral. North Korea is using time. They do not need over-testing of nuclear weapons and long-range ballistic missiles in order to increase their amount of nuclear material for bombs, to increase their number of nuclear weapons, to continue to innovate and improve their long-range ballistic missiles. And that's where the president, I think, has it off. The good news, though, is that if there is a possibility, depends on the details, of a limited deal, North Korea with, say, now 25 nuclear weapons or 40 nuclear weapons, that's better than a North Korea with 100 or 200 nuclear weapons, an unconstrained world. So again, it all depends upon what we're able to negotiate and then what North Korea would actually do, because history suggests there's a gap between what they agree to and what they do. But if we could at least lock in a freeze and a ceiling, that is better than an uncontrolled, unregulated future.
And Richard, I guess I would ask you, how does this foreshadow what's happening with Iran? Because you look at North Korea, and the administration has this hardcore position where they aren't giving an inch, and then now suddenly looks like they are going to give an inch over time. And then with Iran, we probably are going to see something similar happen at the end of the day, possibly.
Possibly, but I think you can argue this one round to flat. The good news is the administration might be willing to have the 2015 nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, a JCPOA 2.0 or plus, where we would say, Iran, okay, we're going to extend the agreements into time, make a much longer term, and by the way, you can't have ballistic missiles either. That would be good. This shows an administration that may be willing to take all their pressure and turn it into a policy. Again, not a solution or not. The other way, though, the Iranians may be watching this and say, oh, cool, we just hang tough, and basically we could then have our nuclear weapons as well. So this one, I think, I bet in Tehran today, there's some interesting conversations.
So, Jeremy, let me ask you something that a lot of people, smart people I know in the foreign policy world have said, which is that it's always been a pipe dream to think that North Korea was going to fully give up its nuclear program. It's all it's got in the world. It's the only leverage. It's the only reason the President of the United States stepped into the DMZ and then walked into North Korea yesterday. Is denuclearization, get rid of the nuclear program altogether, is that a pipe dream?
Well, I don't know if at the end of the day it's ultimately achievable, but I think we have to work hard towards it. We certainly shouldn't abandon it at this stage. We first and foremost need a full accounting of all their undisclosed sites. And my concern about the way the president has set this up, with all the flattery and all the pomp and circumstance, is that if you put yourself in the room of the North Korean advisor to Kim Jong-un, they're saying, hey, Mr. Chairman, this guy relishes and rewards just the photo op. It incentivizes them to deliver Trump a photo op as opposed to real substance. They don't have to deliver substance as long as Trump is praising them for the symbolism.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.